Have you ever wondered what secrets are hidden in the pages of America's origin story? We often picture the Founding Fathers as noble visionaries, united in their quest for liberty. But what if I told you there was a darker side to their grand experiment? A secret pact, a compromise so profound it would shape the nation's destiny and sow the seeds of its greatest conflict. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's the uncomfortable, hidden history of America's beginning. Let's travel back to Philadelphia, 1787. The air is thick with summer heat and even thicker with tension. Delegates from the newly independent states are gathered for the Constitutional Convention. Their goal? To forge a new government, a more perfect union. But this union was far from perfect, and it was deeply divided. The core of the division wasn't just about states' rights or the power of the federal government. It was about the brutal institution of slavery. The northern states, while not entirely innocent, were moving towards abolition. Their economies were based on commerce and small farms. But in the South, the economy was utterly dependent on the labor of enslaved people. Plantation owners from states like South Carolina and Georgia arrived in Philadelphia with a non-negotiable demand. The new nation must protect their property, which meant protecting slavery. They made it clear that without these protections, they would walk away, shattering the dream of a united country before it even began. This is where the Dark Pact was forged. Men like James Madison, often called the father of the Constitution, and other influential Northerners were faced with a terrible choice. They could stand on principle, condemn slavery, and risk the dissolution of the Union. Or they could compromise with the pro-slavery delegates to create a nation. They chose to compromise. This wasn't a single, dramatic moment, but a series of calculated, morally fraught decisions woven into the very fabric of the Constitution. Let's look at the evidence, hidden in plain sight within the document itself. First, there's the infamous 3/5 compromise. The Southern states wanted to count their entire enslaved population for the purpose of gaining more representatives in Congress, and thus more political power. But they didn't want to count them as people for taxation purposes. It was a cynical power grab. The compromise they reached was that each enslaved person would be counted as 3/5 of a person for both representation and taxation. Think about that. The founding document of a nation dedicated to liberty explicitly dehumanized a huge portion of its population, codifying them as fractions of a human being for political gain. But the pact went deeper. The Constitution also included a fugitive slave clause. This required that any enslaved person who escaped to a free state had to be returned to their owner. There was no true freedom, no safe haven. A person could risk everything for a chance at liberty, only to have the law of the land drag them back into bondage. This clause essentially made the entire nation complicit in upholding the institution of slavery. And there's more. The founders also agreed to protect the international slave trade for another 20 years. Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution explicitly states that Congress could not prohibit the migration or importation of such persons until the year 1808. In those 2 decades, hundreds of thousands more Africans were kidnapped, forced onto ships, and brought to America in horrific conditions to be sold into a lifetime of forced labor. The founders literally put a 20-year timer on a crime against humanity to appease the Southern states. Why did they do it? Why did men who wrote that all men are created equal make a deal with the devil? Many of them, including Madison and even George Washington, personally expressed their dislike for slavery. But they were also pragmatic politicians, and in their minds, the survival of the Union was the ultimate priority. They convinced themselves that this was a necessary evil, a temporary compromise that the nation would eventually outgrow. They hoped that slavery would wither away on its own. They were tragically wrong. These compromises didn't solve the problem. They kicked the can down the road and allowed the institution of slavery to become even more entrenched and powerful. The political power the South gained through the 3/5 compromise allowed them to dominate the federal government for decades, ensuring that pro-slavery policies were protected and expanded. The Pact didn't save the Union. It merely postponed the inevitable conflict. The seeds of division planted in 1787 grew into the thorny briars that would tear the nation apart 74 years later in the Civil War. So, when we look back at the Founding Fathers, it's important to see the whole picture. They were brilliant, they were brave, but they were also flawed men who made a terrible bargain. They created a republic built on the ideals of freedom while simultaneously enshrining the practice of slavery. This contradiction, this original sin, has haunted America ever since. The struggle for civil rights, the battles for equality, the racial tensions that persist to this day. So much of it can be traced back to this dark pact made in the summer of 1787. Understanding this hidden history isn't about tearing down our heroes. It's about being honest about our past. It's about recognizing that the story of America is not a simple fairy tale, but a complex, often painful and ongoing struggle to live up to its own ideals. The more perfect union they envisioned is still a work in progress, and it's our job to continue the work they left unfinished. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the complicated heart of American history. If this story made you think, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the past. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.